Welcome back. New York City streets may become a lot safer after changes made to our roads. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed state law allowing speed cameras to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. Joining me to discuss the impact this will have on New York City streets is Bronx and Uptown Organizer for Transportation Alternatives, Shawn Garcia. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, could you first tell us about your organization?
Yeah, so Transportation Alternatives is a nearly 50-year-old transit equity organization that advocates for safer streets and creating alternatives of modes of transportation so that people can get around safely throughout the city, have better access to public transportation, bicycle lanes, that kind of infrastructure. But really, at the end of the day, creating a city that's working for people and making it safe to walk up and down the streets.
Now, as we know, the city expanded speed camera hours to be on 24/7. What were your initial thoughts when you heard the news?
Yeah, so this is something that we have been fighting for many years. I think a lot of people, when hearing the news, probably didn't realize that speed cameras weren't on 24/7, especially since, common sense says that most traffic crashes and most, deaths and violence related to traffic crashes are happening at night. It makes a lot of sense. So I think a lot of people were surprised that the news was something new and that it didn't already exist. We, as an advocacy organization, though, have been part of a statewide coalition pushing for this legislation. So we were very pleased when it came forward. And a lot of this work has been led by families who've been impacted by traffic crashes and who have lost children or loved ones to traffic violence. And they really have led this work, and we're so happy that they're able to celebrate this.
Now, I know for a lot of New Yorkers, myself included, we don't really drive or we rely on the MTA. So people may not know how severe traffic violence was prior to this change. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so currently we're experiencing one of the most deadly periods in New York City history around traffic violence. We're seeing people dying at very alarming rates, especially in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. We're seeing some of the highest rates in 10 to 15 years. And traffic violence really, 4 out of 5 deaths are occurring because of speeding, car speeding on city streets. And so, many years ago, people might remember we had the reduction down to 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, which definitely was a step in the right direction. But many people haven't been respecting that 25 miles per hour and still speeding. And so with traffic cameras, we're able to see a reduction of speeding by nearly 70% citywide. And specifically, like in the Bronx on Grand Concourse, when we have speed cameras, we saw a reduction of speeding by 85%. So we know that speeding kills and that speeding is the leading cause of injurious death for children in New York City. And we know that speed cameras are a big step in solving that.
So I'm hopeful as well. They can be a really big step towards solving this issue. However, following the 24-hour camera change, 2 pedestrians were killed from a car crash. Do you think the city may have overlooked some areas when it does come to street safety?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, this is just one of the pieces that needs to be set in motion to really start, dealing with traffic violence and trying to get to that Vision Zero goal that we've been speaking about for many years. Infrastructure is needed, especially in the most underserved communities like the Bronx, where we see the least amount of transportation infrastructure being developed, safe street infrastructure, bicycle lane infrastructure. We see the lowest rates happening in the Bronx and other outer boroughs. So this definitely helps, but it's not going to be the only thing that helps in this crisis. I would say that with now the 24/7 speed cameras being in effect as of August 1st, we also want to see the expansion of speed cameras. We want to see speed cameras being in more neighborhoods, and this is really data driven implementation. The way that the city has been rolling out the speed cameras, they're doing it in school zones, they're doing it in areas where the most crashes are occurring. So that data-driven approach is really good, but we need to see more implementation and more investment, especially in our communities.
That's a really interesting point because I didn't think about, how many speed cameras are around and which neighborhoods they are. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And you talked about infrastructure. Can you talk about that a little bit more for those who don't understand? Are you talking about just the way our roads are constructed? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. I mean, really, we want to make sure that we're creating infrastructure that is a design that's going to create more traffic calming conditions. So the Grand Concourse is a good example. It's been undergoing construction for many years now, and it's to this kind of goal of creating a safer intersection for people to get across. Grand Concourse has historically, of course, been one of the scariest and deadliest corridors in our borough, and now we're increasing the pedestrian islands in the middle of the road. Now we're reducing the amount of car lanes. Now we're increasing the service lane to be more adequate for busways, for bicycle paths. All these things create calmer conditions. The speed cameras are going to slow down cars, but really at the end of the day, the design is what really creates new habits for drivers and for pedestrians alike.
Now, could the 24/7 cameras also be the beginning towards decreasing hit and runs or even street racing, which is a pretty scary thing if you've ever been around that? Could this help with that as well?
Yeah, without a doubt, we're seeing many, again, most of the crashes that are resulting in death are happening, two-thirds of which are happening at night and on the weekends. And now we'll have cameras. Again, it was at 10 o'clock at night, the cameras were turning off until 6 o'clock in the morning. This is when all the street racing is happening. This is when many of the hit and runs are happening. So it's definitely going to help aid us in that effort.
Now, why do you think the city has finally decided to make some changes, especially, if organizations like your own have been advocating for this for a very long time?
Well, I think it's a combination of success on the advocates' part. Us really making a concerted effort, building a statewide coalition. Many of these things, unfortunately, are not decided on the city level, and there needs to be statewide approval and laws passed. So we've had a lot of success, and we have grown our ranks, and the advocacy has gotten stronger. And then there's also been some good support from the Department of Transportation and other elected officials who understand this crisis that we're in when it comes to traffic violence, and they're trying to, aid us in that process as well. So I think it's a couple pieces coming together. We're definitely moving in the right direction, but we have so much more work to do.
Now, if a driver gets caught speeding, they will receive a $50 fine in the mail. Do you think this is enough to deter people from speeding?
So what the stats show is that people who get at least two tickets from the speed cameras, they're not going to be repeat offenders. They're not going to have a third speeding ticket. I think the percentage is close to 80 or 85% of folks. So we are seeing that they work. You get the fine, you get reminded that you were speeding. Some people maybe didn't realize they were speeding, and it's also important to note that the ticket is issued when you're 10 miles over the speed limit. So 35, 36 miles per hour is when you're getting that speeding ticket. It's going to take a while to get that cultural shift where we are creating a safer culture, and we're not speeding around, and we're respecting each other on the road. But this is definitely going to help in creating those habits.
Now, as you mentioned, the cameras have decreased speeding by a little over 70% on average. How will this affect people who use alternative methods for traveling, like biking or scooters, which we have seen a lot of in recent times?
Yeah, without a doubt, we're in a bike boom here in New York City. It's obviously the direction we have to go with the climate crisis that we're facing. We need to see less cars on the streets, and we need to create alternative modes of transportation that are viable for everyone. So that's more efficient buses and public transportation. That's more efficient bicycle paths that can support, e-scooters and city bike and people's personal bike usage. But also, we need to see the design of our streets created so that there's efficiency for people to get from point A to point B. And a lot of spots here in the Bronx, we still live in places where we have to walk long corridors just to get across a highway. We have to wait for a bus that maybe arrives once or twice an hour. This is not creating that kind of culture that's going to be self-sufficient and good for our environment. So, this implementation of the speed cameras and the infrastructure that we're calling for is what's going to move us in that direction.
Now, you have several campaigns advocating for the reclaiming of New York City streets. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, so our big effort right now is what we're calling 25 by 25. So we're setting this goal to reclaim 25% of New York City streets by 2025 to service pedestrians, cyclists, and other folks who might be not driving cars. Right now, we live in a society that a lot of our street space is dedicated to driving, to parking, to access to highways. While, like you said earlier, most of us are not drivers. By and large, especially in the Bronx, we're closer to 70, 80% folks using public transportation, low car ownership. So we need to make streets that are really servicing the people that live in the communities that the streets are located. And it's not an easy thing. Reclaiming streets is something that people have to learn to look at a street in a different way. They have to know that this corridor can be shut down on a weekend so that kids can play and they can have access to open street. We need to have, open restaurants programs, getting the aid and support of the city so that they can flourish and really become viable for folks. And we need to create real forms of transportation that people feel like they can rely on. The more people can rely on public transportation or taking their bike to work, the more people will do it. It's going to be more cost effective, safer, and is better for the environment.
Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization?
You can head over to our website, trans.org. We do campaigns all over the city, like you were saying. We have a bunch of campaigns happening in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, some that range from creating a bicycle lane on a corridor or supporting the expansion of an open street near a school. So there's so many different ways to get involved. We are a community-based organization. Our volunteers are all from the community, are speaking about the issues in their community, and we're supporting them in their efforts. So if you're concerned about street safety in your community, or if you want to see expansion of different kind of infrastructure, we want to support you. So reach out to us.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.